Welcome, Acedia, the issue behind life difficulties. It's a word that you may not be familiar with, and I'll say more about that in a moment. It's a word that has gone in and out of the lexicon since the 4th century. And in fact, in the 1921 Oxford World Dictionary, it was declared obsolete. But it's becoming more fashionable. So for the purpose of this workshop, I define acedia as any combination of laziness, fearfulness, and self-righteousness that blocks authenticity. I will also suggest that the underlying mechanism of polarization, and therefore some guidelines as to how to respond. I'm Dave MacQuarrie. I'm a student here at VST. As noted, I'm a retired physician psychotherapist. For 25 years, I did my own anger management program in Ontario, subsequently moved to BC because of no snow, or at least limited snow. But in terms of the work that I was doing, I had the unique opportunity to observe a wide variety of people in conflict situations. And about 10 years ago, I decided to undertake my PhD to research acedia and develop the thesis that modern acedia is the underlying basis of climate change, hence my second book. So what follows are my thoughts on the mechanisms of life difficulty, especially that of polarization. And for today, I'm hoping that you will gain three things. First of all, an understanding of the pervasive nature of acedia, how it contributes to the occurrence of polarization. You gain an understanding of emotional triangles, which for me is in terms of what Nathan was talking about, is emotional triangles are a fundamental basis of how to explore systems and how emotional triangles trap us in our responses. And finally, how to better manage our responses to polarization. The term acedia was probably first described by Evagrius Ponticus, one of the desert fathers in the 4th century, of which he said that the demon of acedia, also called the noonday demon, is the one that causes the most serious trouble of all. That no other demon follows in its heels when defeated, but only a state of deep peace and inexpressible joy arise from out of the struggle. He described what he called the 8 evil thoughts, or the 8 bad thoughts, that later became the 7 capital sins, particularly about Christianity, and acedia got lost in the translation. The process did not disappear. The word tended to disappear, but it did stay in the monastic traditions. So acedia itself is very difficult to describe. Some of the descriptors: apathy, enervating despair, unreasonable confusion, rudeness, a blend of frustration and aggressiveness, contemptible fearfulness, spiritual dryness. And the list could go on and on. So in the 12th century, Thomas Aquinas said of acedia that acedia objects to the commitment required to being and living in a relationship of love. And if you think of the Christian and other religious admonitions to love your enemies, that means it's very difficult to love one's enemies if one is in acedia. It's a profound challenge. My interest in acedia grew out of my therapy practice. I predominantly did group psychotherapy, had my own program, which was very effective. But over the years, I noted that about 20% of the client load were either lazy or fearful. I'm not using those terms in a pejorative fashion, simply as descriptors. They wouldn't do the necessary work to resolve their life issues. And they were either lazy I forgot to do it. It wasn't important to me. Or they were fearful, but if I did that, I'd lose my job, et cetera, et cetera. They catastrophize. So I regarded these responses as either existential or spiritual. They were a life choice to avoid pain, but unfortunately, they were ineffective, and there was no therapy that I could offer them. I could simply only challenge what was going on with them. And I therefore, at one point, decided, well, I'm going to do my PhD. I always wanted to do my PhD. I'm going to do my PhD in research laziness and fearfulness. And in the process, I encountered Kathleen Norris's book, Acedia and Me. I highly recommend it. And I also independently added self-righteousness to the mix. So that Acedia became, for me, any combination of laziness, fearfulness, and self-righteousness that blocks authenticity. And I posited it as the underlying basis of climate change, which I won't go into in this talk. But it exists either at the individual or the cultural level, and subsequently became my second book. The mechanism of Acedia is what I propose as this. Something happens in life. It's painful. We don't want to, we don't like being in pain, and we want resolution. And if we're wise enough, we'll move to resolution. If we're not, if we don't know what to do with it, we'll get into an internal conflict. I want to resolve it, but I also want to get away from it. And if we have enough discipline, we'll move to resolution. If not, we'll start to avoid. It's too much. And if we have hope, authentic hope, there's something I can do about this, we'll move to resolution. And all of this is augmented by awareness of what is happening to myself, plus being playful with what life offers and having choice. And if none of this exists, then I will cycle into acedia and then cycle back into the pain and probably go numb in the process. So the processes of acedia are emotion-based behaviors to avoid pain. Culturally, my experience is acedia is the more common choice, unfortunately. So if you think of emotions as some emotions offer us pain, others emotions offer us gain. And if I consider four common emotions: anger, sadness, fear, and joy. Anger occurs when I want to push against something. Fear occurs when I want to get away from something. In sadness, I drop down. In joy, I go up. And in these experiences, I have a sense of power. I can do something when I'm in these emotional states. But if I start to become powerless, the emotions become more intense in my need to gain power. And my anger becomes rage. I give it a different name. My fear becomes terror. My sadness becomes some form of despair. And my joy becomes some form of ecstasy. If I'm truly overwhelmed by the experience, my anger rage becomes self-righteousness. My sadness despair becomes a malignant form of laziness. And my fear terror becomes fearfulness. I catastrophize about what is going on in life. And in the whole process of that, I contract. I move into acedia. So where does polarization come in? In fearfulness, I catastrophize about the dangers that may exist, and I hide. In laziness, the effort's too much, and I basically say, fuck it to the world. And in self-righteousness, I'm basically saying, I'm right, and you're wrong. And I'm going to prove it to you, you bloody idiot. And I get stuck in that. Yet, there's an underlying powerlessness and fearfulness that exists with that. And I use aggression to gain and hold power. If I can find others who agree with me, great, all the better. And if I do not find someone reacting to me, I don't gain the power I need to support myself. So self-righteousness, in fact, most forms of acedia become a relational phenomena. But in particular with self-righteousness, I put it on a spectrum between what I call soft and hard. At the soft end, I perhaps want engagement, maybe, but I might be amenable to influence. I might be amenable to being in relationship with you. At the hard end, I'm wanting power. I'm not amenable to influence. And this clearest statement for that, for me, is a statement that Andrew Harvey wrote in the book, The Hope, A Guide to Sacred Activism. Andrew was invited to lunch with a senior executive. And the executive said to him, let me tell you what you're up against. You're up against people like me. I know exactly what my company is doing and what devastation it is causing to thousands of lives. The bliss bunnyhood of secrets and the offensive self-righteousness of activists makes it very easy for people like me to control the world. I know too, by the way, that the dark forces I play with are playing with me, and I am under no illusion that I will someday have to pay the price. And I'm willing to pay that price for power. Oops, with that slide come in. So my best way of understanding emotional triangles, understanding acedia and polarization is through emotional triangles. It's the most powerful concept I know of in understanding systems work. And unfortunately, I don't have time to go and to do it justice here. But an emotional triangle is any two people and a third person or an issue. Each person connects directly to two limbs of the triangle and not to the third limb of the triangle. There are three fundamental laws of relationship. The first law is I can only change that to which I'm connected. The second law is if I change, others must change. We're connected. And the third law is change requires I stay connected. Now, these seem quite innocent, but they're incredibly sophisticated. Now, all of you have heard of the Serenity Prayer, I'm sure. This is the Serenity Prayer in action. The Serenity Prayer says, God grant me the power, the serenity to accept what I cannot change, the third limb of the emotional triangle. The courage to change what I can, myself and the limbs to which I belong, and the wisdom to know the difference, when and how to interact with the third limb of the emotional triangle. So fundamental, probably the most important concept is that of the third limb. It's a relative position. My third limb is different from your third limb in the emotional triangle. And yet, the more I focus on the third limb, the more stuck I become in the energy dynamics that are going on. Yet my skill as therapist requires that I intervene with the third limb and let go. So as therapist, I function from what I call high intention, low attachment. I am deeply intending to function from the best of my ability. And how you respond is not within my control. So the management of polarization likely means that one party, the other in this case, is being self-righteous. In the background, powerless and fearful. The second party, myself, wanting to push back, likely defensive and angry, potentially also caught in my own self-righteousness. Yet the only person who can change is myself, caught in the third limb entanglement. Both of us focused on changing the third limb. Whereas health requires the direct exchange of energy. It is not necessarily pleasant. You know, if I come up to you and I say, God damn it, I'm really angry about this, and I want a resolution that works for both of us. What do you want? What can we do together? That is not necessarily pleasant, but it is engaging and positive in the long term. So the options for responding are these. First of all, self-care is mandatory. If I am the agent of change here, and if I don't maintain myself, you know, I'm going to eventually go off or something. I can leave. I can create geographic distance. Sometimes it is necessary. I can release my energy. I've lost the slides. Okay, I can release my energy. That's always useful. If I'm stuck in anxiety, if I'm caught in some fashion, you know, Nathan talked about screaming in the car. That's a very effective thing to do, as long as I don't dump it on others, as long as I do it safely. I can plan. Planning is always useful. You know, I can plan 3 scenarios of, you know, what can I do when I come back into the relationship? They may not work. They may not be effective, yet they allow me to minimize my energy and engage effectively with the other. I can extend love into relationship. It sounds kind of mushy, but at the same time, it is always useful. You know, I can tell people of my experience. I can develop clarity as to, you know, positive energy related to the issues. Again, always useful. It may not be useful directly in the conflict. The other person may not be interested in that, but it may help myself and it may help bystanders. Playfulness is the most complex and the most powerful skill in terms of dealing with non-cooperative conflict. And in playful, I am in a state of wonder in which I am not anxious and I am most open to creative resolution. Playfulness sounds like an odd word to use, but when well done, it is an incredibly powerful tool to bring into relationship. And the danger of playfulness is that the other person may not like it. They may escalate because I'm jarring the system when I'm being playful. And finally, the final option is aggressiveness, assertiveness, and sometimes necessary, least important from my point of view, but sometimes necessary. The goal of good communication, from my point of view, is to go on feeling good about the other while we resolve our differences. Again, Nathan commented on it earlier, but the goal, most people have the idea that we have to resolve our differences so that we can feel good about each other. And that's nonsense. We exist in relationship with each other. And there is a conflict that we're dealing with. Can we feel good about each other as we deal with that? Now, a key here to conflict is that people argue conclusions, yet conclusions are based on experiences. You know, I've had hundreds of experiences, you've had hundreds of experiences. We've arrived at different conclusions and we argue about it. But if we will tell our experiences, we focus on self, we focus on being present to the relationship, and we let go of the third limb of the emotional triangle. We're much less likely to argue. Because, let me tell you an experience as an example. It's one that relates to smoking in restaurants, you know, which no longer is a feature. But I remember going into Tim Hortons to get a cup of coffee. They had a glassed-in smoking section. I saw a friend of mine in there, and I went in and talked with him. And I was amazed that within 5 minutes, my eyes were burning and my throat was burning. Now, notice what happened to you. When I said, I remember going into Tim Hortons, I guarantee you walked into your own Tim Hortons, the Starbucks, or whatever your local coffee shop was. You joined me in the experience. And I did not state my conclusion. You know my conclusion. I don't have to state it. So we will not argue about the experience. We will listen to each other in the descriptions, and we let go of the third limb. So in the spectrum of self-righteousness, there is the possibility of relationship. And I attempt engagement at least twice. That's my standard. Because in the long term, engagement is more effective. But if I'm not able to engage, then I look at what else I can do. And if it's a soft situation, is there a way, that I can arrange, challenge the system that might lead to engagement. In a hard situation, I'm stuck with leave or power over. Is there a higher power who might have influence? If I'm arguing with you and you're, really hard in your self-righteousness, can I talk with somebody who has power over you? Am I willing to engage in direct confrontation? Am I willing to sabotage? Can I go into nonviolent confrontation? None of these are necessarily pleasant, but they are options to engage in. Now, if it's media polarization, the polarization occurs at a distance. There's an emotional impact, but no direct contact. Yeah, I'm just about finished. Yeah. There's a limited opportunity for engagement of relationship dynamics. The management of anxiety and self-care are essential. And if not already done, I need to clarify my own beliefs and values so as to be present. I can engage with like-minded groups, but there I need to be cautious of my own tendency to self-righteousness and or the self-righteousness of the group, because the self-righteousness will trap us. And finally, there's also the risk of burnout. Burnout is actually very easy to describe. It's overinvestment in the third limb of the emotional triangle. And yet it is incredibly difficult to manage because as human beings, we're deeply invested in the third limb of emotional triangles. So some suggestions. Polarization represents a combination of self-righteousness and powerlessness. We trap ourselves by investment in the third limbs of our own emotional triangles. And so we need to clarify our values and goals, and from this, build relationships of mutual trust. I need to work with you. I don't have to like you. I do need to respect you. Is the basis in which I function. So, questions?
I feel like I've been drinking from a fire hose.
Yes.
So I know Acedia from the monastic tradition, and you mentioned Evagrius. How did they deal with this in the monastic tradition? How did they deal with Acedia? What did they see as the cause of it, and what did they see as a response or solution to it?
Well, basically, in the monastic traditions, they followed the ideas that Evagrius and the Desert Fathers had developed, that Acedia was a way to, in which the monk or whomever got lost in being distracted by the angst of sitting in their cell. And basically, the direction was sit in your cell. Confront the difficulty that you're facing. And in many respects, as a therapist, that was where I was left as well. Because as I say, 20% of the client though were either fearful or lazy. So flirtatious people don't go to therapists. They send people to therapists. But the fearful and the lazy would come to me. And the only thing I could do was challenge them. I could point out, look, what you're doing is not effective. But by all means, sit in the group, gain what you gain, but sooner or later, you're going to have to do the work. And I actually had one client, after 4.5 years of sitting in my groups, said to me, Dave, I got it. I got to do the work. He did the work and he left.
It's not really a question. Is that okay?
Yeah.
But people always say, well, at conference, you go to an academic conference and there are always those people who say, well, it's more of a complicated question. And then they talk for 45 minutes. So if I were one of the 3 Talmudic scholars who presented in the first part of the session, I would now be wanting to take upon myself. In other words, I'm wanting to do this, but I want them to do it for me. I would now be interested in looking at some of the anecdotes in the Talmud for characters and speakers who use those different options that you talked about when the debate is stuck. And one of the things I like about all of the presentations is it's a really good reminder that there are a lot of different ways to be in a polarized environment with integrity, right? Because sometimes I feel like, well, if I'm not standing up there and shouting the opposite position from the rooftops, then I'm not doing anything. But there are so many ways to do things, both in terms of reaching out to others and when that is not possible, right? As you put it, doing the work, because times will change and then you will be ready.
It's, my struggle here is that we're in a super working problem. We have a limited time to resolve the stresses of our culture. And all of the solutions that I know of are slow. And so there's a part of me that wants to, yell and scream and stuff and, get into my own self-righteousness. But I know it's ineffective. So what I have chosen to do personally is that my skill is working with people to help them resolve the pain. And that's enough. The rest I leave to God.